any ambiguity, I think that the statement of adjustments from the lawyer's office would certainly clear that up. And that would be on the closing date, August 1st, 2019, which is again on page 48. August 1st, same date we saw in the amended purchase and sale agreement, sale price of $400,000, which again is what we saw in the transfer and what we saw in title. On page 49, and specifically page 50, we have the rental rate for the subject property, which we understand to be $6.50 per square foot. Again, significantly lower than the $11 assessed. $500 divided by the sale price, which is the best reflection of market, $400,000, which is an ASR of 2.73. So on page 56, this is a replicate of the requested value we saw earlier, which is $404,200 based on the $650 rental rate and adjusting the cap rate to 11%. Page 58, we again have the alternate request with the 20% cap rate, achieving a $409,300 value. $409,300. Apologies. With that, we will begin the legal summary of our presentation, which begins on page 60, and specifically page 61. This is 2005 ABQB 512. Which is often referred to as the Acton decision. I will go down to point number 24, or paragraph 24, pardon me. In my view, the MGB failure to rely on the evidence of value provided by the recent sale of the property fails to meet the test of reasonableness. Goes on to say that I agree with the following comments from Regional Assessment Commissioner, Region number 11, Nessie Holding, Ltd. et al. Seems to me to be worth remembering that where the Assessment Act, RSO 1980, requires the determination of what a property might be expected to realize if sold on the open market by a willing seller to a willing buyer, the price paid in a recent free sale of the subject property itself, where, as in this case, there are neither changes in the market nor to the property in the interval, must be very powerful evidence indeed as to what the market value of the property is. It is for that reason that the recent free sale of a subject property is generally accepted as the best means of establishing the market value of that property. I think generally speaking, the recent sales price, if available as it was in this case, is in law and in common sense, the most realistic and most reliable method of establishing market value. With that, I don't need to go through that entire decision. I will move on, as I'm sure we're all familiar with it. On page 68, we have another ABQB decision, 2014, ABQB 176. So on paragraph 6, the assessment or the assessment authority has, I think, made some type of a claim that amending a sale based on now that having an effect on equity is I think the defense used by the respondent in this case, which may be similar today. I can't be sure just yet, but I will briefly touch on that. The city advised the board that it had used the direct sales comparison approach and acknowledged that the subject sale was a valid sale, but it's not the only sale and market value is arranged, and that's the city of Edmonton's response. The city continued to add that it was equity that the city of Edmonton wanted to demonstrate that it's fair and comparable. Moving on to paragraph 15. Counsel for the applicant submits that mass appraisal might be used to prepare assessments. but submits they cannot be used to defend one. I agree. Expediency is useful in a massive undertaking, but when something as unusual as a case such as this occurs, more is required to defend an individual assessment arising in the end result. On paragraph 18, in my view, which is page 72, in my view, it is unreasonable for the board to have concluded there was no evidence of market value provided by the applicant on that first arm of the test and to ignore the fact that the onus shifted to the city under their burden of proof to demonstrate that there were other sales of similar properties and to identify what the sales activities were and when they took place. A court might be inclined to find that the board made an error of law and thus find the applicant is entitled to relief it seeks. With that, I will conclude that element. We do have a number of examples of subject sale prices. At this point, I think I can likely conclude the presentation, but I do want to highlight that there are several decisions in the back of this, which I would encourage the board to review in their consideration of this. On page 74, Gregg Properties Co. in Parkland County, we see very exact wording right out of the act and decision. And that would be the case for most of these cases moving forward, where the board did rely on subject sales post facto, some of them being, over a year away from the actual valuation date. In this case, we're just a couple of weeks away. And yeah, so with that, I will conclude, and I'll encourage the board to strongly consider the subject sale as well as the decisions presented. Our request can be seen again on page 275, which is one of the last pages of the document. So thank you for your time during the presentation, and open the floor to any questionings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foden. Mr. Dalrymple, do you have any questions for the complainant?
I have no questions.
Okay, Mr. Leafrink, do you have any questions for the complainant? Mr. Bennington, any questions for the complainant? Okay. All right. Mr. Foden, I just have one question. So effectively, you're relying on the sale of the subject and really no other evidence to support your request. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. But I did notice that you said that there was the actual rent was $6.50, and you pointed to the to something for the Red Apple Grocery. And I note that now it says home furnishings. Has the tenant changed?
Yes.
Since the purchase? Okay. And what is home furnishings paying? Are you aware?
I am not aware. All I and again, we don't see a lease agreement or anything. That was just based on a phone conversation with the purchaser, who had mentioned that the tenant was paying $6.50.
I see. And is home furnishings related to the purchaser in any way?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right. Those are my only questions. Mr. Dalrymple, you still don't have any questions, right? No. Okay. Are you ready for your presentation? Okay. Thank you.
You wish me to proceed? I'll just turn down my volume here. So thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the board, and the legal panel. I appreciate the opportunity today to respond to the complainant for 211 Cent Street Southeast. I'll just go through my presentation, and if anybody has any questions, can everybody hear me okay? You can hear me, Brent? Good. So if you want to turn with me to page 3, just a summary of the facts of the property. Roll number 1985000. It's, as Brent, the complaint stated, 211 Center Street, plan 8410991, block 7, lot 3. It's a retail store. The site area is 1,542.1 square meters. It's zoned Central Business District. The building was built in 1984. The area of the building is 9,940 square feet above grade. And the current 2019 assessment, as the complainant alluded to is $1,091,500. We have a proposed revision in communication with the complainant. We do have a proposed revision as it fits more appropriately with changes we've made to the role this year. So if you'd like to turn with me to page 4. Oh, sorry, I should be using the screen. My apologies. Let's go down here. Is that better if I do that? Probably better for Brent. Sorry, Brent. Okay, here we are. This is a spreadsheet here. So just to go along the top here. So on the top line here for the subject in like pink, we have the size at 9,940 square feet. We used an original assessment. Hold on, please. Kent, help me out here.
What are you want to do? What are you sharing here?
Oh, you just want to go to the document. There it is, right there.
Mr. Dalrymple, I can't see the presentation that you're scrolling through, so
Yeah,
only do what's easy for you. I have it in front of me. Don't worry about me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brent. Yeah, this is new for me too. Can everybody see that?
I think it's probably just as good for Mr. Foden to follow using the document. As long as you make reference to the page numbers in R1, I think there should be no problem
Okay.
with him following through.
Thank you.
Can you see that now? Yes, I can.
Can everybody see that? Oh, good. I can't. Can everybody see my mouse? So on the top line, we have, as a complainant mentioned, the lease rate, or the lease rate for the subject. The typical lease rate we use for those kinds of buildings was $11 a square foot. Typical vacancy we used was 12%, and the cap rate is 7.5. So the original assessment was $1,091,500, rounded. So based on communication and revisions we've made to similar buildings this year, and in ongoing communication with the agent representing or the complainant, we did propose a revision to be equitable with similar properties. So we adjusted the lease rate from 11 to 10.75, adjusted the vacancy from 12 to 15, using the same cap rate, because that's the same cap rate we use for all highway commercial non-residential properties. We get a revised assessment $991,400. So we did make a bit of an adjustment. So if you take the assessment divided by the size of the building, it went from $109 and changed to $99, about $100. So it went down slightly, and that adjustment was made to be reasonable, to make sure we're equitable with similar properties. So I'll just go down to the next page, turning to page 5. So get some pictures of the subject property, formerly the Red Apple store. So it's the picture of the front of the store, the aerial photograph. Page 5, turning to page 6. That's an aerial photograph of the rear of the building. Pretty standard building for retail. And then this shows the red rectangle shows the building, and then the portion of the building that's a parking lot, right? It's just to the south of the building. It shows the plan is on here, the block 7 and the lot 3. Turning on to page, page is this? Page 8. This shows a relative location of the subject property, 211 Center Street, indicated with a red rectangle. Downtown is shown to the west, and the Bob Snodgrass Recreation Center to the south. Just kind of give you an idea where the property is. So before we proceed, I'll just go on to page 9. I'll just kind of go over legislation briefly. I'm sure everyone's aware of how the legislation that we use. It certainly does frame the process of assessment. We follow the Municipal Government Act, as well as matters relating to property assessment. So it's very heavily regulated. So the process of assessment, these are the rules that we follow. So we're bound by these rules, and we're unable to step outside these rules, even if we believe it be more appropriate. So the world of appraisal is certainly different from the world of assessment. So briefly stated, if you go down to section 289.2, states that each assessment must reflect characteristics and physical condition of the property as of December 31st of the year prior to the year of the taxes imposed. So we're looking at the condition of the property as of the end of the year, which we have done. Turning on to page 10, it makes reference to matters relating to assessment taxation regulation. As the complainant has defined also, market value is the amount that a property, as defined in section 284, might be expected to realize if it is sold on the open market by a willing seller to a willing buyer. So it's a pretty open definition. It's one that's generally accepted in the marketplace. And then for assessment purposes, according to section 6 of, we call it MRAT, we state that any assessment prepared in accordance with the Act must be an estimate of the value of the property as of July 1 of the assessment year. So this is July 1, 2019. Now, in addition, we have quality standards we are required to meet, which sets us a bit different from appraisal. So what we do in assessment is we build value models based on market information available to us. And I'll just kind of explain a little bit here. Since 2017, prior to 2017, not all properties in the town of High River were valued according to the income approach. So in 2017, we did a substantial amount of communication with non-residential owners. That was the first year that we sent out requests for financial information. In addition to asking property owners for their lease information, we sent out significant communication with them stating what we were about to do. We're going to now be assessing your property on the income approach, and it was all laid out in plain language of what that meant, because it was the first year that we did that. So we really pride ourselves on this communication with property owners, and this is going to become evident as I go through this presentation. So they're well aware of how the lease rate works, how the vacancy rate works, and the cap rate works with the calculation of their assessment. Since 2017, have spent significant time with property owners communicating how the income approach works. So they're well aware how this approach works. I've had many property owners in to see me personally and asked in the field about their assessment. They've compared their assessment to other properties. They're very well aware of what's going on. We're boots on the ground in High River, so we pride ourselves in having that communication with the property owners, with council and administration. Everyone's well aware of the process and of the ingredients that make up the assessment. So I just want to state that. So in addition to July 1 being our effective date, December 31st being our physical condition date, we build value models to assess or value each property type in the town. So the subject property is a large retail store. So we build, we've sent out requests for information on rental information of all properties like this subject property. So from the receipt of that market information, we review it as a whole to determine typical market leases for buildings like that. And then we combine it with a capitalization rate that we use to value the property. So we build a value model based on all the information available to us. And then in the review of that, so we build the model, we develop an assessment, and then to check the reliability of the assessment, we divide it by each respective selling price. And for each modeled property type, our assessment to sales ratio must be between 0.95 and 1.05. So when we submit our assessments to the provincial government every February through ASSET, if we don't meet these quality standards, our assessment isn't legal. So we're audited as it's submitted to ASSET. And we're also audited after and through a detailed audit. So through mass appraisal, we're required to meet these quality standards. So I guess turn on to page 11. For the valuation of the non-residential properties in the town of High River, we use the income approach to valuation. And just going down to the second paragraph, where it's a single family residential, as it goes, income producing properties such as retail strips, office buildings, warehouses, or single title apartment buildings are valued primarily using the income approach in conjunction with sales comparison, where significant sales have occurred. So all the non-residential properties similar to the subject property have all been valued using the income approach. I'll just scroll down to page 12. Sorry, my mouth is drying up. So for assessment purposes, the objective of assessment is to achieve similar values for similar properties. So we're not just valuing one property. We have to value all properties based on market information we've received, indicators of value, to arrive at a reasonable and consistent valuation for similar properties. So that all properties similar to the subject are valued the same way. So it is the property itself that's assessed. And then under data collection and verification, it just kind of goes into, we conduct a re-inspection cycle every year, where 20% of all the properties are reviewed every year. Since 2017, all the non-residential properties have been reviewed in full every year. We've received substantial information from property owners, and so for this group of properties, it consists of about 280 parcels. We pretty much review the whole assessment process for the non-residential properties every year. So the appraisal on page 13, the difference between an appraisal and an assessment is an appraisal is a valuation of a single property based on the review of comparable sales. Assessment is a valuation of an entire group of properties, so a mass appraisal, which is what we're required to do for property assessment. Again, we're required to build valuation models, which with the quality standards we're required to meet. So the primary goal in assessment is a level of market value and fair process, and not a pinpointed single property appraised value. So all properties have to be assessed the same way. And just going down to the bottom of this page, a sale price might not equal market value for any of the following reasons. The sale might not have occurred in the assessment year or the date on which the property was valued, which is certainly the case here. The complainant has stated that the sale occurred after July 1, and I'll explain later why we didn't use that sale or lean too hard on that sale because of that. The purchaser might not have been aware that similar properties were selling for more or less than the price for which the property was purchased. The buyer or seller may have been unduly motivated, and the sale may have involved a trade, partial interest, or special financing. So the assessment, the sale price doesn't always equal the market value. And then on page 14, it just states that we, to the best of our knowledge, there has been no significant problems with the sales that we're using here. So I'll just scroll down to page 16. The subject property, we've gone over the details of the subject property. This shows the assessment of property, as the complainant alluded to as well. Page 16. Page 17 shows the calculation based on $11 a square foot, vacancy at 12%, and a cap rate of 7.5 for this year's assessment. And so the sale that the complaint has alluded to is a post facto sale, so it's after July 1, 2019. So we don't use sales after July 1. We don't use them in our analysis. We're not blind to them. We do keep our eyes open to sales in and around the effective date, because as the complainant suggested, Oftentimes, especially in non-residential properties, there are not a lot of sales that are occurring during the 3-year period we look at. So when a property does sell, we go, oh, hey, we finally have a sale. Let's have a look at this. So it's not that we're blind to it. In the analysis for this year, I was well aware of the sale. But in looking at that, we use the title date for every sale that we review. The complainant has alluded that the offer to purchase and agreement for the transfer of the property had occurred up until July 1 and within 10 days. We have to use the title date for every property. If we were to use the offer to purchase date for all the sales that occur, it would be very difficult to get that information. I had to do a demonstration report to get my accreditation of an apartment building in Calgary, and I tried to use the offer to purchase date, and it's really difficult. Property owners, especially non-residential property owners, they won't share that information. And so unless we can secure that information every time for every sale, so if we did it for non-residential properties, we'd also have to do the same approach for residential properties. We'd have to phone the realtors or the property owners or the vendor or the purchaser and ask them, when did you sign the offer to purchase? It's not reasonable. So to be consistent with all properties, the sale date we use is the title date. Now, another reason we use the title date is that sales have to be time adjusted for the change in value over time. So we use 3 years worth of sales. So from July 1st, 2016 to July the 1st, 2019. So we use analysis to determine what that change in value would be, and we use the title date to do that. So it gives a reliable and consistent methodology to time adjust the sales. Again, the goal of property assessment, the assessment must reflect the typical marketplace. Methods must be applied consistently with similar properties valued the same way. So we're all about, is it typical market value for that property group, and is it applied consistently? Those are the firm rules that we have to follow for a property assessment. So, sorry, I've kind of gone through this with the offer to purchase date here on page 18. Just a minute here. And I'm being a bit smart here at the bottom of page 18. Like, this is a low sale. Like, so when we were doing the analysis, I saw this sale come through, and I knew the lease rate for that building for prior was $650, right? I knew what the existing lease rate was. When I saw the sale, I did a lot of homework and contacted a lot of realtors in the town. I contacted appraisal companies in Calgary. I even contacted a company called The Edge, and what they do is they make available to appraisers or valuers. They'll verify property sales, and so when you call them, they'll give you the title, the transfer document, and any information about the property. It's readily available, and you can use it. But even and everyone I talked to, they were all well aware of the sale, and went, no, we wouldn't use that. And I've even called the vendor, and it's hearsay. I have sent them an email to ask them for information about the sale, whether they believed it was a fair sale, and I am in the process of sending them a letter to do the same. I may even have to knock on their door because they're seniors, and they don't have they have an email, but they don't readily use it. But they have told me that they don't believe it's a good sale, but that's just hearsay for now. But I want the board to know that we did our homework, we did our due diligence, we did reach out to the vendor, and I've talked to realtors. They're unable to provide any information for me to use. But I will show that not only in the absence of getting that information, I'll show that the assessment is consistent with similar properties. And conversely, if the selling price had been $1.5 million, like substantially higher than the assessment, would I be encouraged to use that sale in the assessment? I would think not. right? You can't have it both ways. Like obviously it's a low sale, and there's a lot of weight, a lot of motivation to have the assessment use that in the analysis. But if it had been a higher sale, obviously I wouldn't use that, right? I'd be looking, they would be seen as trying to squeeze blood from the stone. Oh, look, oh, this is higher. I should use this. We don't do that, right? So just on page 19, I was able to find communication with the Edge in the city. This is what they gave me. They said it had been advertised for sale. I don't know if there's any dates on here. But it was listed for sale at $1.5 million. So when we see information like this, like we've got it assessed at $1 million, and it was listed for 1.5, we go, well, wait a minute, that's kind of weird. Why? That's a little. It's an indicator that there's. We have to do some homework, right? Like one sale doesn't make the market. And if there is one sale, like the complainant alluded that this is the first sale that's come along for properties like this. So we go, ooh, we need to look at this. Like maybe this is a good indicator. But one sale doesn't make a market. But if it were to have good reason to include it, we'd have to look at more evidence, right? So if this leases for $650, or what are the buildings leasing for at $650? We go, so is it consistent? Does it compare with similar buildings' lease rate, vacancy rate, cap rate? Right? There's more to look at than just the selling price. Sorry, I keep jumping ahead of myself. So this on page 20, just showing the assessment change year over year. From the 2018 assessment, so July 1 valuation date to July 1, 2019, the change in the value of non-residential properties came down 2.55%. So at the bottom, under indicators of value, all sales are referred to as indicators of value, while one sale is an indicator of value. There's an article in the addendum you can read. I just want to include it for reference, which states appraised values are based on gathered data and professional judgment of the professional conducting the appraisal. So if one sale were to be relied heavily upon as an indicator of value, it would require a sound valuation and can be combined with other market indicators to substantiate its reflection of the marketplace. So they're a guide, right? They're not. If a sale occurs, we don't make the assessment of selling price. Even when we use sales in our property assessment, we build a model based on sales available. We don't change for properties that sell, we don't change their assessment to equal the selling price. Their assessment becomes the same as the modeled assessment, so that they're all the same. We don't build a value model and then all the properties that sell, their assessment is a selling price. We don't do that. That would be unfair, right? So all similar properties have to be treated the same way. So page 21, highlighted in green, shows the requested assessment from the complainant. So under the lease rate, they're saying 6.5. The vacancy is left the same at 12%. And they're using a cap rate of 11 to arrive at a revised assessment or proposed assessment of $404,287. So if we look at the assessment per square foot, the current assessment is $109 a square foot. 99 would be on the proposed revision, and the complainants would be $40 a square foot. I look at that and go, that's pretty low. Like that's not even barely a garage, right? That's just when I look at it. So lease rate proposing to go from $11 to $650. No change to the cap rate to the vacancy cap rate from 7.5 to 11. The complaint states that 7.5 is pretty low, but I don't use cap rate. A cap rate of 11 would not work in the town. I've talked to the assessor in Canmore, which is very similar to High River, and they use cap rate of 7.5, the same as we do. So let's talk about the lease rates. I mentioned earlier that we send out requests for information. So the lease rates that we use are typical. So we get a range of lease rates. Obviously, some property owners, rather than having vacancy, they'll reduce their lease rate to keep the space occupied. And some landlords will say, no, I want $12 a square foot, and I'm prepared to live with the vacancy until then. So we gather in all the requests for information, and we derive a typical lease rate, like a core lease rate. And we typically reach out to the community as well and saying, hey, we're going to use $11. Does that seem reasonable to you? Right? Not in addition to the requests we get, I reach out to the realtors every year, to Century 21, to and many other realtors in town. I get together with them and go over the schedule and say, do these lease rates seem appropriate to you? So I make sure I get some positive feedback from property owners from the marketplace. So as stated, $11 a square foot was used in the original assessment. All of the large properties, and I'll be referring to them shortly in the spreadsheet, like Sobeys, Extra Foods, Co-op, all the largest spaces were appealed this year. And so in the review of those properties, we changed the lease rate from 11 to 10.75. So that's why we made the adjustment accordingly to the subject property to be consistent with equitable properties. And I'll just move on here, onto page 23. So what I've included here are some equity comparables. So again, on the top of the spreadsheet, the three values, the original assessment, the proposed revision, and that suggested by the complainant. So I've got Sobeys, No Frills, and Co-op. So if we just go look down the 2019 lease rate for assessment, these are all owner occupied, so they're not leased. So I have no lease information on these properties, but we use 1075 for all the lease for the lease rate for these properties. Minus 10% was used for vacancy. I used 12 originally for vacancy for the subject property and changed it to 15. I just wanted to be reasonable. I think I just want to be reasonable and fair, changing to 15. I think I've tried and endeavored to do that. Compared to similar properties, I used 10%. And 7.5 has been used as a cap rate for all these stores. So for equity comparison, the assessment per square foot for the subject or proposed were at 99. The requested assessment for the complainant is $40 and change per square foot. And then for the comparables, it's $111 for Sobeys, $111 for No Frills, and $106 for Co-op. Co-op's a little bit lower because it has a mezzanine. It has a lower rate per square foot. So this spreadsheet shows for owner-occupied spaces comparable to the subject property. Their assessments are very similar to the proposed assessment for the subject property, $99 compared to $111 and $106. The $40.60 does not fit, right? And we've communicated the assessments in town haven't changed very much in the last 3 years. And were the assessment at $40.67 a square foot for comparable buildings, I'm sure for that much of a difference, we'd be hearing from the property owners. Page 24, we look at equity comparables on which we have lease information. These consist of the Shoppers Mall across the road from the subject property, PV Mart, and the Medicine Tree Mall. The subject property is 9,900 square feet roughly, and Shoppers is 8,500. Yeah, for the similar space, PV Mart is 20,000 square feet, somewhat bigger, and Medicine Tree Mall, it's where the Dollarama is. It's 12,000 square feet. I've included a column here. It says typical rent. as a percent of actual. So the typical rent used, 1075, is 90% of their actual lease. So where our typical rent we used is lower than the rent that they're charging. So 1075, well, the 1075 is in Shoppers Mall because we adjusted that this year because it was appealed. PV Mart, it stays at $11, and so does Medicine Tree Mall. So these are comparable properties that we have lease information on. The lease information we have is rate that we used is less than reported. If we go to the assessment per square foot, again, 99 we're proposing for the subject, $40 and change that's requested. So for shoppers, we're showing $102 a square foot, assessed value per square foot. For PV Mart, 119, and then for Dollarama, 105. So it shows for properties that are reporting lease information, the assessment for the subject is very comparable and based on market data available to us. And when I'm looking, like when we're looking at this, when we saw the sale come in at $400,000, to make that $400,000 work at $40.67, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit at all. And not that we always gauge like the feedback from the community. If other property owners see a substantial difference in their assessment, if we were 2/3 higher, than the market, we'd have a revolt in town. Like the feedback we get, like that's got to be a litmus test. Like for me as the assessor, the phones are ringing hot. Like I say, we've been doing this for 3 years now. If we were so far out, I'm sure we'd be receiving substantial feedback from property owners. Page 25 just shows the relative location of the subject shown with the blue arrow. And Sobeys is just a little to the north, Shoppers across the road, Co-op to the southeast, and No Frills and Medicine Tree Mall are on the east side of town. So High River's not that big. They're fairly relatively close to each other. So we don't have any sales, like the complainant stated, we don't have any sales of properties like the subject, other than the one that's under review right now. What I have done is I've included the sales we have to sort of substantiate the cap rate. So I've got 1, 2, 4 properties here. I got Smitty's. It's up on the east side of town by McDonald's and the Ramada Inn. Walker's Country and Western Wear. It's a Quonset. It's on Center Street. Same location as the subject. It's just a little south of there. And we've got 609 Center Street. It's just it's between Walker's Western Wear and the subject. And we have number 5, 938 Center Street. It's at the other end but they're all in Center Street. Obviously, I can't use a restaurant. And let's see here. So I got 2 sales. One's a Quonset. Let's just look at that. It's 6,000 square feet. So 504 Center Street. The lease rate I used was $850 because it's a Quonset. It's not really the same kind of property as the subject. So $850 was the lease we used for all Quonsets. Vacancy of 8%. And I used a bit of a higher cap rate, 7.75, because of the kind of building that it is. So the assessment for that building is $525,600. That's $87.60 square foot, compared to the subject property at $40. This is a Quonset. This property sold the 1st of February 2017. That's the titled sale date. Sold for $539. Our assessment to sales ratio is 97%. So for that Quonset, for a little higher cap rate than what we use for the subject, we're right on market. We're pretty close to market. Like we're right on the marketplace for that. And the next one down. Actually, let's just go down to the pictures here. This might help a bit. Oops. Oh, that wasn't good. Excuse me. Sorry, folks. I just got to find the page again. So here's the pictures. Here's Walker's Western Wear. It's Quonset. Here's the one at 609. So it's a retail space and it has a little space above. You can't quite see it on here. And this one at the end, that's by the roundabout, if anyone's familiar with town, is at 5938 Center Street. So the much smaller spaces, but these are the sales we have. So for the other two retail spaces, so 609 Center Street, it's about 2,600 square feet. The lease rate we use on that one's $13 for the main, $12 on the upper, 12% vacancy. We use a 7.5% cap rate. Oh, I have my sale in here. That's not very good. Oh, here it is. Sorry, I had to combine them together. Here we go. So the assessment's $344,872. That's 166 a square foot. It's much higher, but it's a smaller space. Sold and transferred on the 18th of October 2018 for $340. So comparing the assessment to the selling price, we're at 101%. So using that 7.5 cap rate certainly worked on that building. It's the smallest space, so that warrants usually for smaller spaces, the lease rate goes up, which it has in this case, to $13. Remember for the subject property using 10.75 because it's a larger space. And then the other one by the roundabout, it's 2,000 square feet and change, $13 a square foot. It's a similar building to 609. Vacancy at 12%. Cap rate is 7.5. The 2019 assessments 274, 253. Assessment per square foot is $132. It was title sale 27th of June 2018 for $260,000, which is it's 105%, so very close to the 2019 assessment. And while Smitty's isn't a comparable sale, comparable property, it's a different kind of property, but it's on non-residential property located on the highway commercial. So the lease rate we use for that restaurant's $21. Vacancy -8, 7.5% cap rate. So the 2019 assessment is $1,180,000 and change. That's $236 a square foot. So much higher than the subject, of course, but it just shows that in that case, the 7.5% cap rate works because the assessment is 98% of the selling price. So we can't. Obviously, in High River, and the complainant alluded to this, we don't have a lot of sales. So we couldn't have a different cap rate for retail centers, a different cap rate for small stores. We do mass appraisal so that everything works, so everything is consistent within the town. In a larger urban center, you could possibly have a different cap rate for different sizes of the buildings based on sales information. But we don't have that in High River. So that's pictures of the subject, and these are relative location of those properties compared to the subject. Everyone see the map? Everyone see the map? Good. And so we alluded before that we have to fit within quality standards. So we use 17 non-residential sales in our assessment. So each of these red bars represents the assessment divided by the selling price of each of those properties. I don't include all of them, but the ones on here, they're mentioned here on page 26 are included. So there's 4 here. So those 4 are part of the 17 sales. So this represents the assessment divided by the selling price for all the non-residential properties using the 7.5 cap rate. So this represents the ASR, if you will, right? The ratio for each of those. At the top here on this ratio of statistics, our median percentage has to be between 95 and 105. We're at 98.4. So this shows for the assessments for the properties that sold, their respective assessments fall within the quality standards we're required to adhere to with the rules we follow with the provincial government. We're bound by those. So we've achieved our objective. So if our ASRs or if our median ASR for this group doesn't fall within that required quality standard, we can't submit to the province. you want me to go with my conclusion now, Madam Chair, or when we wrap up? Okay. Okay, I'll do that then. Thank you. That's all I have for now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. So for Mr. Foden's benefit, the conclusion can be gone over when he does his final summary statement and argument. So at this point, Mr. Foden, do you have any questions for the assessor?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Beginning on page 9, and all questions are through the board. Page 9, there is a number of rules set out here. And I'm wondering, would the respondent agree that these are all rules which determine the preparation of the assessment?
Yep.
But
I'd say that's correct. Yep.
would you agree that they have no effect or no bearing on how the board is determined to rule upon an assessment, and it's strictly with regards to the rules required to create it?
Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Well, these rules are what we use for the process of assessment. So if the board is considering whether the assessment is reasonable and consistent, these certainly would apply to that, right? Because these are not only are they the rules that we apply, that we follow for the preparation of the assessment, they form the foundation of assessment. So, right, for mass appraisal.
Okay, thank you. So you'd agree it's in regards to mass appraisal, but not in regards to how the board must determine on it?
Well, I understand that the board determines whether this is a reasonable assessment using mass appraisal, because that's how we prepare the assessments.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on. On page 10, we have some, I guess, measurements in determining the quality of an assessment, that being an assessment ratio between 0.95 and 1.05. Well, I understand that the post facto sale was not used within the model. Would you agree that it falls well outside of the 0.95 to 1.5 assessment ratio?
That sale does fall outside that ratio, but this ratio is intended for the model and not for each indicator value.
Thank you. Moving on to page 13. At the bottom of that page, there's a number of reasons as to why a sale price might not equal market value. Would you agree that there's no evidence before the board on any of these points on page 13? And this is simply hypothetical, I guess, for the nature of this hearing?
I disagree with that, because I've pointed out equity comparables and subject properties that are similar to the subject, like so the owner occupied properties and the equity comparables don't compare to the subject property at all. So they would, in my mind, they show that this sale is questionable, right? I wouldn't rely, based on comparing the subject to similar properties, is certainly a strong indicator that this subject can't really be relied upon very, very much at all, especially the fact that it's a post facto sale based on the title date. So I would certainly suggest that based on how it compares to similar properties in town, it really stands out. Like that is evidence that this is not a good sale without substantial research.
Okay, thank you. Would you say that the property is unique and that the sale is unique?
I believe the sale is unique. I mean, you're correct. I don't have substantial information at this point to provide to substantiate that, other than comparable properties.
Thank you. And I believe during the presentation, there was some acknowledgement. Would you agree that the rental rate at the time of sale was $6.50?
For that specific property, I believe that's what the lease rate was, yeah.
Thank you. You also mentioned that a cap rate of 7.5% is consistent with what we've seen in Canmore. Was any analysis done on sale prices per square foot in Canmore and how High River relates to retail sales in Canmore in that regards?
No, I was referring to Strathmore, not Canmore.
Oh, sorry, I thought I heard Canmore. Okay, thank you for
No,
clarification.
sorry, my apologies, yeah. So I don't have any information regarding Strathmore.
No problem, thank you. With that, moving along to, I believe, page 24, which are equity comparables. Do these rental rates shown include all of the tenants? Is that an average rental rate across the entire building? I'm just trying to understand exactly what I'm seeing.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Brent. So on the top there, if you just look at shoppers first, I've only included, it says main area, formerly Timothy Fred's. So that's 8,538 square feet. And so the figures you see there, the 10.75 and the vacancy and the cap rate are only for that specific space. The next line down is shoppers, the shoppers part, that's a pharmacy. That's 16,000 square and change. So that's a different space, right? We have that valued at $23 a square foot because it's a pharmacy. It's not a retail store like a big open space like the subject. So I guess didn't show the calculation because it's a different lease rate, right? We're looking at similar spaces assessed a similar way.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Okay.
Moving on over to page 23, which is just one page back, which I suppose are additional equity comparables. Is this to suggest that the Sobeys, the No Frills, and the Co-op grocery stores are all assessed exactly the same as the subject property, which is the Red Apple grocery store?
It's to suggest that we use the similar lease rate and the same, and actually the vacancy for those stores is 10 and I use 15 for the subject and the similar cap rate. It does show that we have to be consistent in the application of the model.
Thank you. Do you think that the Red Apple grocery store would be considered from an investor's or a purchaser's point of view as an inferior property or a superior property?
I see it as being comparable. I don't see it as being either inferior or superior. It's space, right? If you were to go in that store today, Timothy Fred's occupies that store, and they did spend some money on tenant improvements. If you go, I would challenge anyone to go in that store today and look around in there, and tell me if it's a different inferior or superior than the comparables. I'd say it's very, very comparable. On the income approach, it's based on space, right? And so long as there's nothing detrimental with the location or the condition of the building, and it's located right on the highway. If it was set back from the highway, possibly, but it's not. It's right on the main thoroughfare.
Okay, thank you. Now the sales, so that was, I suppose, equity, and now we're moving on to sales, which is on page 26. Just to be clear, these are the sales used to create the assessment as well as to defend the assessment?
These are more to illustrate the 7.5 cap rate, right? They're different. Only like there are higher lease rates. In each case, the lease rates for these properties are higher because they're different property types. But as I said, there are no buildings like the subject, like the No Frills didn't sell, Co-op didn't sell. So there are no larger spaces in town that sold. So in absence of that, we have to come up with a cap rate from other sales, right? So that's just to show that the cap rate is consistent. Like obviously the lease rate has been adjusted accordingly to the property type, as has the vacancy. And so notwithstanding those, the cap rate is working. Like it's an appropriate cap rate for the town. And again, as I suggested, I'm touching base with Canmore. I mean, with Strathmore. Yeah, touching base with Strathmore. It's certainly a similar cap rate that they use. Like we do a lot of communicating with Strathmore, and we feel like we're very similar. The lease rates are very similar to Strathmore. The cap rates are very similar. So those are kind of litmus tests to also indicate that overall, looking at the marketplace in its entirety and not just on one sale, that the assessments are reasonable and consistent.
Okay, so you did mention that these are different property types, and then I suppose just to include a few questions into one, there are many differences between this sale and the subject, one being the type of space that it is. I mean, we're seeing one condo, one of them is a Quonset hut, one's a restaurant with significantly higher rental rates. You'd agree that in their entirety, these sales are all quite different from the subject?
Oh, sure.
Okay, thank you. There's also no sales on this page in the year of 2019. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And the lease rates are all higher on this page, is that correct?
Except for the Quonset, yeah. It's at 850.
Right, so, okay, you're talking about the assessed rate then. So I guess these are all assessed rates, they're not market rental rates?
These are the assessment, yeah. The lease rates used in the value model, yeah, for these property types.
Okay.
So $11 would be for the subject, and how these compared to the subject.
Okay, with that, I will conclude the questioning. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brent.
Thank you, Mr. Foden. Mr. Bennington, do you have any questions for the complainant? Or for the assessor, sorry.
No questions.
Mr. Leifering, do you have any questions? Okay, Mr. Dalrymple, I have a few questions. The first is, we're on page 27. I'm looking at your time adjustment. It looks like there's virtually no time adjustment for over the valuation date. Is that right?
Yep, for doing time adjustment for non-residential properties, like for the residential properties, I think last year it was like 2% over 3 years, so it's very little per year. And for the non-residential properties, it was virtually flat over 3 years. So there was very little time adjustment required based on the sales information we had.
Okay, so on page 20, you said that commercial and industrial had gone down between 2018 and 2019, but if you look at industrial, it actually went up. I'm just wondering if that's a calculation error or the number that you put in is wrong.
Didn't notice that. Yeah, I'll have to look at that. That's a good question. Yeah, I'd say you're right. That's probably a calculation error. It should be probably +3.
No, it should be more like +10, shouldn't it?
Oh,
I mean, if the numbers are correct, I guess. Is what I'm
yeah, I'd have to check that. That's a good question. I'll have to check that.
Okay,
My apologies for that.
But the subject is considered a commercial property. Is
That's
that
correct,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so what the industrial is doing is probably not relevant to where we are.
No, it's not.
My other question is related to your page 24. You've got percentage or typical rate assessment as a percentage of actual rent. So this is where we see, like, for example, where it says main area, formerly Timothy Fred's, is 90% of the assessment. So can I infer that the actual assessment is something like $9.75? Or the
No,
actual
the other way around. The other way around. So the 1075 is 90% of the actual.
Okay, so the actual is more like, say, $12 or so. Okay, now I understand. On subject, it says owner occupied, but it's not owner occupied, right? It was actually rented. If you look above it, we're above the 90%, you put owner occupied for the subject.
Oh, that's just that comment is meant for the subject property. It's the column at the very top.
Yeah, where it says typical rent assessment as a percentage of actual rent, you put owner occupied
Right.
for the subject, but it's not owner occupied, right?
The subject property?
Yeah, the column says owner occupied, owner OCC, which I'm assuming means owner occupied.
Right. Well, that is a subject property. The subject property, well, it is leased, right? But it's not.
You're just not using the number, but you're not suggesting that it was owner occupied.
No, that's right. Yeah, I see where you're coming from. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in terms of the subject sale, I gather that you're considering it to be an outlier and you're trying to find more information about it. I'm just wondering, to the extent that it seems to be the only sale, how are you going to deal with it for like next year? Or have you gotten to that yet?
Oh yeah, I have. Like I have talked to the vendors, and they're going to. I'm in the process. I've talked to them on the phone. They're very elderly. I believe the owner is 90, right? And so I believe it's useless for me to talk about it because it's hearsay.
Right.
So I know I'm very comfortable with the fact that they've told me it's not a good sale. Like they're up, like it was devastating to them. They weren't able to get their value, but they had to sell it. They were
Okay,
very
so it was an unusually
but I
motivated
will be.
seller kind of
Yeah,
is that the basis on which you're not putting as much weight on this sale as
absolutely. And I have talked to them, and they said they will provide me with a letter stating that they believe it's not a reasonable sale. So I have to wait until I get that communication. Obviously, I don't have it at this point.
But that's only relevant to next year. So
absolutely. And so that's a good question, because that's the reason why lots of times we can't include these sales, because it takes us time to get that information. It's post facto. So it's post facto and such an outlier as you suggested. So unless we can really build some evidence as to the bearing of that sale on the market, then whether that decides whether we can or cannot use it, right? So that, like you're exactly right, that goes into next year's assessment, and we're working diligent to get that information.
And I'm presuming if you decided it was a valid sale, it would affect all the non-residential properties?
It's this one sale, so it's an outlier. So outliers don't have a significant effect. Obviously, we're not going to change the assessments by 2/3.
Right.
Okay. And so we'd have to do further research, or we'd have to do. I talked to people like the owners, like Toby's and Co-op. We're looking ahead here. We are going to do a pre-roll rollout. So we touch base with the agents and possibly property owners late in January, and we'll do a test with them. So you have any questions about your property before we put it on a roll, right? It's good practice to do that. We haven't had a lot of time to do that in past years, but given the economy this year, we're going to have to really have our finger on the pulse, right? So it's in of itself, that sale, even if the vendor says, oh no, it was good. Well, it's just one sale, right? And I'd be surprised if any appraiser or another assessor would lean heavily on that, right? Obviously it's questionable. It really stands out, right? Maybe it is an indicator of a downward trend in the market, but we'd have to combine it with other research.
Okay. I'm just looking at your page 29, though. If this sale is included and your assessment doesn't change appreciably, you'd have a very short red line there.
I'm sorry. Oh, well, obviously, right? Well, so if we use that sale, like if we use a cap rate of 11,
right?
We'd have to do some adjusting to the lease rates. So we'd have to use a much lower. If it's 650 for that building, then on other spaces it would be substantially lower. Well, that's not what we're getting reported.
Right.
Right. It'd be very difficult. Like the lines just don't line up. Like if that's what I mean. It just doesn't fit. At $400,000, it's got a lower assessment than the Quonset. I'd try and sell that. Like it just doesn't add up. We'd have to do some manipulation of the data to make sure everything is consistent, right?
Okay, and you don't have any information that it was the condition or something unusual about the building? That
It was
caused it?
listed for 1.5, right? So I was in the building when Red Apple moved out. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just it's a big open space.
Okay.
And I know, like I say, I've talked to the vendors, right? And based on that information, when I talk to them, it's like, and I've talked to realtors involved that are aware of it, but they won't come, right? I'm not going to put them on the stand, right? That will be unfair, right? And so I do that. We have to do our due diligence. We have to reach out to the community, talk to similar property owners. Like I say, I sit across the table from people who own similar properties, and if they were out that much, I'm sure that has to be a reflection of where the assessments are, right?
Okay.
We're not like I live in London, Ontario, and I'm totally out of touch with the community, right? Maybe I am, and I need to be tuned in, right? But we reach out, like I say, that's why I started at the beginning since 2017. When we rolled out the income approach, some assessments doubled, right? So you have to know what's going on. Some of them doubled and they never even called, right? And some of them doubled and they came in and like not happy, right? So go over the process. Why has it gone up? Well, here's your assessment. Here's sales we used. These lease rates we used, right? We can't divulge that confidential information, but we say, well, these are typicals. Do they seem to work for you? And they go, okay, I get it, right? And would you sell your property for that? No, I'd sell it for a bit more or the same. Very few will come in and say, oh, I'd sell it for 2/3 less than what you're selling. So we have that. And that's just hearsay, but we can't do our job unless we have that good communication. That's critical, right?
Okay, so just to sort of summarize what your position is, the fact that it's dated August 2019 means that you're discounting it for the purposes of this year's assessment or the 2019 assessment, the sale. But you're going to look at it more carefully for the for next year's assessment.
Correct.
All right. I don't have any other questions. Do either Mr. Leferink or Mr. Bennington have any questions arising? Mr. Bowden, did you have any questions arising?
No questions arising. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. So we're now, and you had no rebuttal evidence.
That's correct.
Okay. So we're now at the point where we're doing a summary statement and argument. Are you ready to go right into it, or would you like a bit of a break?
I'll leave it up to the board. I'm ready for summary, or we can take a quick 5-minute break if.
Are we okay to go? Okay. All right. In that case, we're ready when you are, Mr. Bowden.
Okay, thank you. So to summarize, the respondent's position is in the position of the complainant quite hypothetical in nature. I think through questioning, Madam Chair did summarize effectively, saying that the entire fact-based argument of the respondent would be that since this property hit land titles in early August, that is the sole reason for not considering the sale. But what we do know is, one, the Acton decision, this is a highly comparable scenario. In the respondent's evidence, we see that it's listed on the open market for an extended period of time, and then negotiated through the valuation date and agreed to just prior to the just after the valuation date. So highly comparable in that regards. And obviously, we know that the best indicator of value is the sale of a subject property based on the Acton decision. So that would be in response to the respondent's position. Truthfully, I mean, in their own words, I believe they said that a lot of what they mentioned was hearsay. I would say it's simply hypothetical in nature, as there's absolutely no evidence that there's anything wrong with this sale, other than the fact that it's lower than the assessment. So to look at the respondent sales, I mean, we have no comparable sales. More importantly, or as important, there's also no recent sales. So I would encourage the board to look at both the most recent sale as well as obviously the most comparable sale, rather than relying on sales of restaurants, Quonset huts, and condos, just completely different properties, but also quite dated. So a lot of the respondents' argument was also surrounding the creation of the assessment, and I would encourage the board simply to use the discretion which they have been granted in the Municipal Government Act and not rely upon a mass appraisal because, as I'm sure we're well aware, using mass appraisal to defend an assessment at the Assessment Review Board is incorrect. So with that, I would simply encourage the board to look at the best evidence before them being the sale of the subject property. And I thank you for your time, and I would point the board to our requested assessment, which is on page 19 of C1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Foden. Mr. Dalrymple?
So I'll just read the conclusion here. Because the title sales date of the subject property is after July the 1st, 2019, it was not used in the sale analysis for the 2019 assessment year. Due to the significant difference between the sale price of the subject and the 2019 assessment of the subject, as well as the similar properties, thorough validation of the sale of the subject needs to be completed, and we've alluded to that. The investigation of the sale is being conducted, and if deemed valid, it will be included in the sales analysis for the 2020 assessment year. So we'll be reviewing it next year. Because it falls outside, like you alluded before, because it falls after July 1, 2019, it needs some significant research, and we need time to do that. And it's treated just the same as every other sale in town. Notwithstanding the sale price from the review of lease information obtained from local requests for information, the typical lease rate used for the subject is consistent with similar properties and is reasonable compared to active leases. In fact, it's lower than the active leases we have. With consideration of the different lease and vacancy rates used for other non-residential properties, the capitalization rate used is appropriate with the resulting 2019 assessments, meeting the quality standards as set out within provincial legislation. The complainant suggests that the sale price is the appropriate value of the subject property. While the price paid secured the transfer of the subject property, through the review of other market data, lease and vacancy rates, available sales, etc., and a reasonable estimate of value is determined through mass appraisal for the subject and other properties. Through this process, the subject and all similar properties reflect typical market activity and are valued consistently. Based on the information we have provided, it is the opinion of the Town of High River Assessment Department that the subject property has been fairly assessed when compared to similar properties and upon review of available non-residential market sales. So we respectfully submit that the assessment or the amended assessment of $991,400 be accepted as a value estimate for this property for the 2019 assessment year. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Foden, you'll have an opportunity to have the last word if you want to avail yourself of it.
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay. Are both parties satisfied that they've provided everything that they feel they need to provide in order to for us to arrive at our decision?
Yes.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. As you know, the decision has to come to you in writing within 30 days, and we'll work to having that done. In the meantime, this hearing is concluded. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you
Chair,
very
and
much.
thank the board and everyone for accommodating the virtual hearing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah, thanks, Brent.